Okay, what I call the shear, actually I need a sheet you can follow. I call it the paradoxes of Teshuva, because when you start to explore not just the mechanics of Teshuva, but the attitudes and emotions, I think all of us hit a lot of paradoxes, and not resolving the paradoxes, but having answers to those paradoxes is part of what makes Teshuva so resonant. I think, to me, I never heard this articulated, but I always felt it innately, that one of the premises to the Rav's writing, and I think probably articulated once, I just don't know where, I'm not holding, as they say in the Rav's writing, is that being that we're so different from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there isn't one interface that can define. If I'm, let's say, speaking to Yaakov, so I'm a human being, you're a human being, we either like each other, we don't like each other, we're communicating, we're not communicating. There can be one variable that characterizes the way we're interacting. But Hashem is so different from me and from you that there can't be one factor or one aspect that defines or characterizes the way we interact. And very often the multiple elements are going to clash with one another, at least seem to us to clash. Avan Yira, Karav Rachok, and Teshuva is part of that, because we're trying to find HaKadosh Baruch Hu again, and we're looking into ourselves and trying to improve ourselves. But human beings are complex personalities and complex beings, and we're living in complex times. And just to reduce Teshuva to one variable and to ignore some of the conundrums that Teshuva evokes and some of the challenges that Teshuva evokes, and we're all old enough that we've already traversed the terrain of Teshuva year after year, that we recognize it. It's a familiar territory. Remember when I was younger, I was just getting to know Teshuva. I was just getting to understand what Teshuva is, what it isn't. And now I'm older and I feel like I know it. And I guess there are certain advantages to knowing Teshuva and there's certain disadvantages to feeling too familiar with Teshuva. So I wanted to try to articulate some of the paradoxes of Teshuva. But this year in particular, or last year as well, I feel the paradox is that we're so engrossed, as we should be, in our collective experience, in our national challenge, in the pain and suffering that so many people are living through. And Rosh Hashanah felt congruent and consistent with that, because Rosh Hashanah's themes were collective and universal. Rosh Hashanah's themes were Malchus Hashem, for a world that's broken, doesn't see him. Rosh Hashanah's themes were squarely fitted upon Kisaver, Mishel Zadam, and Aretz. It was hard for me to say one sentence in the davening without conjuring October 7th and post-October 7th meaning. I felt there was a seamless transition. There's nothing about Rosh Hashanah that was a Hesach Hadas or in any way neglecting or moving away from what I'm feeling the rest of the year. And now it's Yom Kippur, and Yom Kippur is much more, in theory, it's much more internal, it's much more personal. I always tell the Talmud, in Rosh Hashanah, you should stretch and its altitude and its breadth and feel beyond yourself and think about Hashem and think about the cosmos and think about humanity and think about the world we live in. And Yom Kippur, just vector-wise, it's the exact opposite. It's a dark descent into the self. It's a very private moment. It's you and HaKadosh Baruch Hu meeting upon that isolated mountain that Moshe Rabbeinu saw HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Yud Gil Midas HaRachamim. And it just feels so incongruent. What right do I have? I feel almost morally guilty, morally inadequate to take a day off from this experience that is so engulfing, should be so immersive. And how do I square the two? And I don't have the answer to that question. I just know it's a dilemma. I felt the dilemma last year. Being that we're running a little bit late, I just quoted some of the famous prakim of Teshuva just to pay attention to them. David HaMelech Sefer is a very private Sefer of Teshuva, very personal Sefer. And in source number base, Hein be'avon chalolti v'ched yechamasni imi, hein emes chafatzta batuchos v'sasum chachmatu dieni. So he feels as if he's been marked with sin and born into sin, which, by the way, we have to be very careful. It shouldn't turn into a Christian notion of original sin. No one's born into sin. We're not fated to sin. But it's part of human nature, and it's part of the human cycle and the rhythms of life. So that's why was created before the world, correct, before even a person. For other reasons, of course, that's a different reason because it's beyond the individual experience. So Perak, Nun Aleph and Lamed Ches are the underappreciated prakim of Teshuva. Those are the two prakim that in David HaMelech pours his heart out. And in Nun Aleph, he's describing the infiltration of Chet and the infiltration of HaKadosh Baruch Hu into his own kidneys and into his own innards. And Hashem knows his every thought and every move. And if Chet is there, what chance does he have? What escape does he have? In Lamed Ches, he basically describes Chet as an illness. And I believe that's where the Gemara got Gedola Tshuva Shemevia Rifus Leolam. Obviously, he got it from the pasuk in Hosea, but you feel David HaMelech being sick. There's a mortification, almost a nausea at the prospect of chet. There's no tranquility in my soul. My bones are rattling. Each pasuk brings a different toxicity of chet. I feel like the sins are hovering above my head. I'm carrying this heavy burden. I feel like we're carrying this heavy burden. I feel infected. I feel as if it's all festering. Now they see, I feel low. That pasuk resonates with me. Like you're walking around, it's light outside, but you feel enveloped in darkness. You feel as if everything you see is dark. And Teshuva for David HaMelech is certainly dark. For Cook, it's very light, but there's very little Teshuva. There's very little light in David HaMelech's Teshuva. The end is Hashivi Lisason Yishacha. After I perform Teshuva, I hope to recapture some of that light. But David HaMelech is in a dark place, is in a sick place. My innards are full of weakness. I'm roaring with mortification, with anger. I'm so upset at myself. I'm dizzy. Each pasuk is a different emotion of sin. And sin carries a very heavy mixed bag of emotions. And until you explore those emotions, your tshuva can be very clinical and performative and rehearsed and very tidy, very domesticated tshuva. What should I improve? How can I improve? Here's a moral inventory, and let me improve it. And David HaMelech shatters that conception. For David HaMelech, tshuva has to be a very ragged emotional landscape. And these are very deep internal moments. I'm not going to read every parak. Kuf Lamed Ches was David HaMelech says, I can't hide, I can't escape. He's looking for an out, he's looking for a place to run, he can't run. So how are we to shift from thinking about people who are suffering, thinking about the historical moment, thinking about Am Yisrael, thinking about what Hashem wants from Hashem as a collective, and then shift into very personal tshuva. I don't know the answer to that question. Like I said before, paradoxes, as the Rav, I didn't finish the sentence before, in our relationship with Hashem are not meant to be resolved. They're meant to be maintained. They lend depth and meaning and energy to our relationship because we know we're interacting with a being that we can't reduce into one variable, one single variable. And I think the same is with tshuva. But this year, that's the paradox, as it was last year, that I feel like I can't escape. So part of the way I try to escape it is I think about Netzach Yisrael. Rabbi Soloveitchik would mention that if you look at the chasima of the Shemona Esrei, so the chasima Shemona Esrei is source number ches, Melech mochel v'solech lavonoseinu v'lavonos amo beis Yisrael. So there's a symmetry. HaKadosh Baruch Hu forgives personal sins and forgives collective sins, the sins of the Jewish people. Whatever we feel the sins of the Jewish people may be. We feel that our people, as a people, have gone off the rails. So there's some parts of our peoplehood that are broken. And then the pasuk, or the bracha concludes, "Umavir ashmoseinu b'chol shana b'shana." But there is no symmetry. Not mavir ashmos am Yisrael. Mavir ashmoseinu doesn't say mavir ashmos am Yisrael. And Rabbi Soloveitchik noted that the notion of ashma for am Yisrael is unthinkable. Ashma, the Ramban says, korban asham is milashon shemama, that will become extinct, that person who sins so severely deserves to become extinct, and the asham stands in his place and alleviates whatever threat of annihilation or extinction. So a person can be facing ashma, and therefore Hashem has to be mavir ashmoseinu. But the notion that Am Yisrael is facing ashma it's completely incompatible with Hashem's historical trajectory, the physical reality. So for Hashem to possibly say mavir ashmos Am Yisrael, it can't exist. And that's the battle we're fighting, and we're fighting the battle. It's an annihilist. It's an annihilist program. Someone says river to the sea is basically speaking about Jewish annihilation. They're not speaking about a two-state solution side by side. They're speaking about the annihilation of the Jewish people, because out of the state of Israel, the Jewish survival is as it's been proven for the last 2,000 years, isn't tenable, isn't sturdy. So that's part of what I think about, but that still doesn't get it, because that's me running away from personal tshuva and running towards a more historical, universal drama that we're living through, which is, of course, part of Yom Kippur, but it's much less part of Yom Kippur than Rosh Hashanah. So how do I carve out private space when you think about Moshe Taragin and my own sins and my own flaws and my own weaknesses and my own desires and my own improvement? And how do I take time off from thinking about our people and their needs? So the other place I go to, and these are just things I'm thinking about, I don't have easy answers to these paradoxes, is a source that didn't make it in. I made these sources earlier this morning after Slichos. I forgot is, I think it's Reb Levi. Is it Reb Levi? No, it's Rabbi Yonasan in Yoma Pevav, Gedol Tshuva Shemivia Geula Liolam. And Rav Kook took that in a more cosmic sense, that Tshuva is a alignment of Hashem's Ratzon, where the whole universe is aligned with Hashem's Ratzon, and by sinning, we're becoming misaligned, we're moving out of that alignment, and therefore the world is wrecked, And by tshuva, I'm returning back into that alignment. And once the world is aligned, it moves forward and advances. And the advance of the human condition is gula. But I believe that if I do tshuva, I'm bringing Hashem closer into my world. If I bring Hashem closer into my world and bring Hashem closer into our world, and I'm advancing a better world, a world without hatred of the Jewish people, a world that recognizes v'yeta kol po ketap alto. So I'm trying to find that overlap between me improving my midah or my Talmud Torah or my resistance to the Yitzhahara, and how that's going to contribute to this larger calculus that we're battling in a broken world of hatred and anger against the Jews and refusal to accept Hashem's presence in this world, and thereby expressed as refusal to allow the people of Hashem to live in the land of Hashem. But it's not easy. I just don't know that I have the right to just take 24 hours off, although that's what Hashem wants from me, because as the Rambam says, source number Aleph, Yom Kippur, we would always quote this Rambam, and to me, this was almost an anthem of Rav Lichtenstein, because so much of life in Israel, and especially in the world of Rav Kook's Talmidim, is so collective and so Am Yisrael oriented. And where are our people? And how do I become part of the people in my identity? And Rav Lichtenstein, you could fairly say in part because of his Chutz La'aretz background, and he always told us that people from Chutz La'aretz had more for better and for worse of an individualistic definition. What are my responsibilities to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? But I feel that he always pulled us back into that private space. What are my responsibilities to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? What are my responsibilities to the Bonashol? Let's say I was living on a desert island and I didn't have Am Yisrael, didn't have history to be part of. I just had me and HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Ma Hashem Lokecha Daresh Mimcha, from you. And that was always the anchor for us and to us. But this year I'm not able to just look at that private space. I don't think we feel that we should, because the needs of Am Yisrael are so dire. It would be betrayal to who we are as people if we just took that time off. So I don't have an answer to that paradox. I just feel that we all have to live through that paradox. It hit me this morning very powerfully. I mean, it hit me Rosh Hashanah also, but there's so many other things hit you in Rosh Hashanah. It hit me this morning where I believe that Am Yisrael has swapped the parak of Tehillim. If you go back 3 years ago, what's the parak of Tehillim that everyone says after davening? Shir HaMalos Mimamakim Grasich Hashem, which is about Teshuva from Avonos. Now, the go-to parak of Tehillim is which doesn't mention sin. You could shoehorn sin into it, but it's about Hashem Yishmorchem Mikor Yishmor Safshacha Leinu V'Leishan Shomi Yisrael Hashem Yishmor Tzavracha Me'atav Yad Olam. And then today, of course, we return back to the classic parak of Tehillim. Shir Malas Mima Makim. It felt like slipping your foot into an old shoe. Oh, that's the parak that I said for the first 55 years of my life. But not recently. Recently, it's all been Shalom Al Sasayinai Alaharim. So if you want, the metaphor is which parak should be centered on Yom Kippur, and how could you turn those two parakim into one? I don't have any easy answers, but that's where I start with my paradoxes. And I don't know the way forward. I just know that the struggle is probably more important than the solution. The second paradox, which is more of a tshuva, an internal tshuva paradox, is what I call the specter of recidivism, which, since there are some Israelis here, may not know, recidivism means sliding back to where you were before. And we could say it in simple English of repeat performers. Chazal talk about, source number Aleph, Homer echte v'yashav, ein maspikim biyado lasos tshuva. I think there are 3 degrees of echte v'yashav, and I think Chazal were talking about B and C. There's no way they're talking about A. Let's say a person says, I'm sitting at 1 o'clock, and I'll get around to tshuva at 6 o'clock, and it's transactional. I'll pay the ticket and I'll enjoy the food. I'll enjoy the show. So of course you get to see the show before. Sometimes some restaurants you get to eat before you pay. So for a movie you have to pay before you see. For a restaurant you eat and then you pay. So this is I'll eat metaphorically. I'll take what I want. I'll enjoy myself, and then I'll pay the ticket. I'll pay the price of admission with my tshuva. That's so hypocritical. That's so gross. That's so undignified. It's unthinkable. Why would Chazal have to relate to second graders? Chazal aren't speaking to second graders. They're speaking to people who have some modicum of maturity, of self-respect, of spiritual dignity, of spiritual conscience. It's such a blatant violation of what religion is. It's turning religion into a joke, into a farce. I don't think Chazal were talking about echte v'yashav in that tone. I think they're referring to 2 different levels of echte v'yashav. One is where you delay religious responsibility down the pike. I think a lot of us are great at delay. We know what we have to accomplish, and we say we'll get to it because we prioritize other aspects as being more important. It's too hard sometimes for us, not just prioritization. So in our minds, we have a plan, and we'll get to it. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and of course, aim must be Teshuva, but I think that's pretty much what the Midah of Erech HaPayim is. One of the Midahs of Erech HaPayim is Hashem knows that you're delaying it anyways. Ad Yom Osot Techakela. So I don't think Chazal are pillaring or incriminating that person. He's just saying, Echta v'yashiv, if you keep planning and delaying, aim must be of Yadol Teshuva. You fall into ruts, and you never get around to it. It's not like HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want that tshuva. He's Erech HaPayim, but you just develop this procrastination of tshuva and procrastination of religious growth and religious meaning, religious accomplishments, that just life catches up with you, and then you find yourself, to me, that's the story of Yonah. Yonah isn't a fool. Yonah knows he can't hide from Hashem. Yonah knows that he has to face the music. Yonah knows that the day is coming. He just not now. He'd rather go off on a cruise and go to Tarshish and then push the can down, down the road, kick the can down the road. That's why when Yonah runs away from Hashem, the words are very carefully chosen. Source number Beis, Vayakam Yonah livrach Tarshisha, not mipnei Hashem, but mi lifnei Hashem. Vayerd Yafa v'imson yabana v'yitzchal levat Tarshisha mi lifnei Hashem. Twice it says he just doesn't want to stand in front of Hashem with that spotlight on him of expectation. He's like, I'll come back on stage. I just need to leave stage for a while. It's the same language of Kayin. You don't want to be in that state of moral and religious duty. You'll kick the can down the road. He knows his day of reckoning is coming. He knows he has to show up in Tarshish. He's just delaying it. And that's, I think, the first meaning of Echta v'yashiv that Chazal say. The second level of Echta v'yashiv is where a person is very sincere. He's not delaying anything. But in the back of your mind, and the people in this room that are older, you can identify with it. Do we really think that Erev Yom Kippur, Tafshin Pei Zayin, will be that different from Erev Yom Kippur, Tafshin Pei Vav? We've already been through this movie. We've already made commitments, and it's human nature that we slide back into habits. And we know what happens with our tefillos. We know what happens with our Shmiras HaLashon. We know what happens. We know that Cheshvan is different from Av. Cheshvan, in the heat and the aftermath of Yom Kippur, is very different than Av, which is already 10 months away from Yom Kippur. So how do we stand in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with all these pledges, knowing that we won't stand by our pledges, and we don't want to feel like a hypocrite, because as Rav Amital taught us, Hashem doesn't take any false tefillos. It's not a fun house of mirrors. You can't fake your tefillos. Hashem sees through your heart and through yourself. How do we stand in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu without feeling like a hypocrite, without feeling like a sham, without feeling like a farce? That to me is a dilemma I've been struggling with for many years, because I know myself and I try very hard. How do I know that? Or how can I stand in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu without being embarrassed? And the answer that I feel, well, one of the answers that I feel, is based on the pasuk in Parshas Vayera, which we read yesterday. Actually, we read 2 days ago. I missed Kriyas Torah because I was shuffling between minyanim for my parents. I actually had to miss part of Kriyas Torah. But when Yishmael is in the desert, don't be afraid, source A, Kishama Elokim es kol hanar ba'asher husham. Okay, I'm going to say this in a heretical way just to make it graphic. This is the biggest mistake Hashem ever made. Obviously not. Like, how many hundreds of millions of deaths could have been avoided if Yishmael would have been taken at that moment, just a little baby? I mean, if you could, the alternate reality, like there's no fundamentalist Islam, there's no death, there's no murder, there's no vandalizing the face of Hashem, presenting him as a murderous God, chas v'shalom. But Hashem doesn't judge Yishmael based on his future. He judges Yishmael in the moment. And that moment, Yishmael is a baby, thirsting for water, running a high fever, in the middle of a hot, scorching desert. And Hashem listens to the Kol Anar, B'Asher Hashem. Namely, my goal in Yom Kippur is not to guarantee Av. My role in Yom Kippur is to generate so much conviction and commitment and devotion that right now, I call it the pill test, because I try to make them a teacher. I'm not a lecturer. I try to make things graphic for 17-year-olds. I say, if there's a pill I could take that could lock in the current me and make sure that me would be around in Av, I would take that pill in a second. I can't because I'm a human being and they don't have a pill like that. Human beings are weak and frail. But if there were a pill like that, Hashem, I definitely want to be the person that I pledge to be. There's not a trace of hesitation, not a trace of commitment. I'm fully in, but I'm a human being and I'm not going to stand by that pledge, but I really want it. And I want you to see that part of me. And I want you to judge me based on the me now, even though the me in the future will be a pale shadow of the me now. And I believe that's what the Rambam means when he writes. It's a very awkward Rambam, but I think that's what the Rambam means when he writes, Umaya Teshuva, source number Dalet, Sheyazov hachote cheto, v'yasir ma'am nechshavto, v'yigmor belibo, there's the Gemir's das, Shalesei o, shenemar, v'chein yisnachem el shavar, regret about the past, v'yayid olav yodea talumos, shelo yashiv lezeh ached le'olam. Hashem testifies. What does that mean? Why are we invoking Hashem to testify? And it's false testimony, right? Because we all know. So that means if you fail after tshuva, then Hashem was an 8-checker, chas v'shalom? No, because the Kadosh Baruch Hu knows in your heart what you'd like to be. He's the one. And in some ways, he can see me better than I can see myself. He can see my conviction because you know that you always doubt yourself, and doubt is healthy, and you're always confused and complicated. And if there's one being that can know the depths of my sincerity, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I want you to be made a lie that that's the person I want to be. So I'm trying, and you can see into me in ways that I can't see into me. And I want you to be the aid of who I am now and to judge me based on who I am right now. And to me, this is I feel like a lot of Yom Kippur davening has to be transformed. Rav Amital transformed Ne'ilah, that the drama was not in heaven and the gates closing, but the drama is in the gates of your heart, and opening your heart for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. To me, Ne'ilah was always very harsh. I spent 23 hours thinking of Hashem as Avarachamim, and now the last hour, he's a very mean gatekeeper who's closing the gate, and I'm trying to get my tefillos in. And it was so incongruous. All of a sudden, Hashem turned into a mean gatekeeper, and I'm trying to shove an extra tefillah. And I've always said, no. That's not what Ne'ilah is. Based on the Medrash, Al Kapot Amanul it's about your heart. He's trying to get in, and that's the gate he can't get unless you open it. So he really wants to get in, and consistent with Yom Kippur. Now open your heart. Psach lev, psichas halev, not psichas shari shemayim. So one of the scariest parts of Yom Kippur davening to me has turned into a very different part of Yom Kippur davening. To me, it's a hopeful part of the davening. Source number Vav, the Vidoy. Manu malafnech Hashem l'keni yashem maram. Manu sapel l'fnech Hashem shchakim. Halo nistros v'aniglos ata yodea. Ata yodea razeh olam. Talim v'sisra kochai. Ata chavetz kochad revatem. It's a very scary part that you see through me, and I'm transparent. You see all my depths, and you see all my complications. All of a sudden, this davening to me has now become a hopeful davening. Hashem, see me. See my internal sincerity that I may not be convinced of because I'm pessimistic, I'm jaded with life, I've already lived. But you can see the purer part of me that I may not be able to see. So now I'm not threatened that Hashem sees into my depths. I'm actually very hopeful that Hashem can see the type of me I'm trying to become that I won't allow myself to believe in because I've been burnt by experience. But Hashem can see the deeper want, the deeper ratzon that maybe won't hold up. And that to me is my way of disentangling from that dilemma. I know that the facts will be different, but that's because I'm a human being, and Adam means I'm going to try to make the facts, obviously, unless I'm sincere and I'm hoping for something that will be different, then there's no sincerity. But if you ask me to put my money on it, I don't know. If you ask me to bet on it, I know that I would place a bet on it. But I'm trying because I've seen what's happened, and Vegas is Vegas, and you just have to trust the odds makers. But if you ask me what I want and what I'm dreaming of and what I'd like to happen, it's a different me, not the one that falls into old patterns. Just because I don't want to be guilty of taking time for the next person, because the way this year is abbreviated, I'll quickly segue to the third paradox. I had 4 or 5 to talk about, but the third paradox, and this is something Rav Lichtenstein spoke a lot about in his Sefer, restoration and return and restoration. I think it's called the English Sefer. So I think is like the classic Rav Lichtenstein Sefer, because every single aspect of Teshuva becomes a metaphor or a microcosm for religious life. There's nothing in there that's Teshuva. This is, I think, his magnum opus. By his light, and this probably would be side by side. Every piece you read, you're reading about religion in general. He zooms out, then he zooms back into Teshuva. So in the restoration, he talks about the partiality of Teshuva. And especially when we look at Teshuva through the lens of Tefillah, and of course, for Rav everything was halachic, so Tefillah is all or nothing. You can't dip aver. It has to be all or nothing. And what about when we reach the moment we hit what I call the brick wall of Teshuva? We know this is not something I can change this year, or nothing I can change at all. And if we're being honest with ourselves, especially those that have traversed this terrain, we know we hit the glass ceiling. We know we hit that brick wall. We say, I can't get past this. This is something I know. It's just, I'm going to carry it with me. Maybe one day I'll get past it. I'd like to get past it, but I just don't have the emotional resources, I don't have the courage, I don't have the wherewithal to get past it. So what does that do to your tshuva? Now, what it does to your tefillah, I don't know, maybe you don't have tefillah because it's all or nothing. But Rav Lichtenstein developed, again, based on a very fascinating halachic concept, and again, for Rav, everything had to come from halachic constructs in the classic Brisker fashion, a way of dealing with that. So let's start with the Mishnah Avos. I'm trying to be as brief as possible, really under 5 minutes. Mishnah Avos talks about someone that forgets his learning. Part 3, source Daled, Kilim Mischai Benafsho. Very, very threatening, very scary. We all forget Torah. The Mishnah is aware of this impossibility, which leaves more questions than answers, because the two things in life, as we've learned, you can't force yourself to do are forget and fall asleep. If you try to fall asleep, you won't fall asleep. And if you try to forget, you won't forget. Something you have to, especially obsessive minds, it's hard to let go. When you don't let go, it's hard to fall asleep and it's hard to forget things. So the Mishnah is aware of the problem, doesn't really give us a solution. Oh, you're only chayiv if you try to forget it. Who's chayiv? So Rav Aaron tried to say, well, what does shichacha mean? So we think shichacha is a mental experience where you either remember it or you don't remember it. But to prove what shichacha is, and by extension to prove who's chayiv shechech davar milimudo, Rav Aaron took us to the isser or the mitzvah of shichacha. Okay, so let's go. Just show us how his mind works. If it came for this reason alone, that would be enough. So source number 5, Mishnah and Peah, Rashi quotes it in Parashat Kiteitzei. Let's say you're walking down your vineyard and you pass a certain row. Let's not talk about grapes, because so you're walking down your wheat field and you pass a certain row of wheat and you forgot a certain row. That would be shechacha. Okay, because you forgot. Let's say you cut it, you forgot to gather it. That would be shechacha. But let's say you calculate. Oh, there are 12 rows of wheat that I have to get to, but in theory there are 13. In practice, there are 13. In your mind, there are only 12. So you're planning on cutting down 12 rows of wheat, but they're really 13. So for a moment, you forgot the 13th row. That's shechacha, because at that moment, if I interviewed you, how many rows of wheat are you going to cut? 12. And they're really 13. You forgot 13. That's not shechacha. You can still cut that row, because the lashon of the pasuk is lo tashuv lekachto. You can't circle back and take what you forgot. But anything that's ahead of you that you forgot is not considered forgetting. What does the Mishnah in Peah say? Source number hey. Shelafanav eina shichacha. Shelacharav shichacha. V'meishu b'bal tashuv. Zaklal. Kol shu b'bal tashuv shichacha. She'enu b'bal tashuv eino shichacha. So Rav Aaron, of course, this is not just limited to the legal parameters of shichacha. It's what's called forgetting. And here's the answer. I'll say it in my words. As long as you plan to get to something, you haven't forgotten it. If it's still in front of you, it's still part of your plans, it's not something you've forgotten about. Now, to make it more romantic and more existential, dreams are valuable even if they don't come true, because they define your identity. Your identity isn't just defined by your accomplishments, relationships, and behavior and identity. It's also defined by what you're dreaming about. And hold on to dreams, even though you know they're unlikely to come true, because they define you. They're your aspiration. They're your ambition. They're what your better self, your more nobler self. So the things we plan to get to in life, which is a little bit contradictory to what I said before, but that we really have plans to get to, the nobler things we plan to get to are not things we forget. So therefore, Rav Aaron said, based on getting back to Mishnah and Avos, if you're planning to learn certain things, even if you've forgotten them already, but you plan to come back to Pesachim, you plan to come back to Bava Metzia, Hadron Alach, Mesechus Bava Metzia, Hadron Alach. So even if you forgot Tosos and Daf Beis, you plan to get back to that Tosos. It hasn't fallen out of your mind, so you're not considered Shochech Davar Milimudo. If you're Paresh from Torah, Dvar Hashem Basa, that's Gemara Sanhedrin. Kala Paresh Milimudo. And that would be someone for whom forgetting. I guess in theory, if you're Paresh from Limud, you have photographic memory, you're not Chayav Misa, you're just Dvar Hashem Basa, because you remember everything, but you're Paresh Milimudo. But for most of us, those are synonymous. When we're Paresh, we forget. And we're not Paresh, even though we may forget mentally, it's still on our plate. And Rav Aaron, in one of the articles, applied this, I think called the partiality of Teshuva. He applied this to Teshuva. If there are chataim that we know that at this stage in life we can't solve, for all sorts of emotional roadblocks and resource limitation and limited bandwidth, and we're focusing on certain parts and ignoring other parts, but we haven't resigned ourselves, we'd like to get to them, and we plan to get to them, then it may not be a tefillah, tough test, but it still is part of our Teshuva process, and it's not like we have cut the cord and cut bait with that aspect. So these are some of the paradoxes of Teshuva. And like I said before, I think if you work hard at it and you're honest, you inevitably come across them, because we're complex people and life isn't as perfect as Teshuva would make it feel like. And I think you have to confront them head on. And try to find answers, but at the very least accept the fact that they're paradoxical. I don't want to take any more time, so I'll stop here.